Welcome to Mastery Fractional CFO's Punchy podcast, short, impactful podcasts where I speak with business leaders from all walks of life. I'm your host, Ryan Chenier. I'm the founder and CEO of Mastery Fractional CFO Services. And today I've got with me Glenn Poulos. Glenn is a longtime sales expert and entrepreneur. He's currently the executive vice president and general manager of a company called NWS. He's an award-winning author. He's the podcast host of The Profit Powerhouse. He's a business coach and more. Glenn, tell us about who you are and what you do. Tell us about your business.
Well, thanks, Ryan. It's good to be here and looking forward to this. So I was a former civil servant, worked for the federal government in Canada until my boss came along and kicked me out of the building and said I was in the wrong career and that I wasn't moving at the right clip for the government, for my government coworkers, and said I would probably do better in sales, right? And so in 1985, I took his advice and I quit my job as an electronic technician, and I got a job selling electronic gizmos and widgets, in 1985, right? And I did that for about 6 years, and I realized that the owner makes a lot more money than the salesman. The salesman is uniquely positioned to leverage themselves to make really good money. And I mean, I often talk about that, but I realize the owner has a higher, one step function higher of leverage, because he's leveraging himself plus all the people below him. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I went out on my own, started a company in 91, and same sales kind of company, selling technical products, and ran that for 15 years. I sold it. I had an exit. And then I went on shortly thereafter to create a similar but slightly different business doing the same thing, which I ran for 15 years. And I sold it to NWS a couple years ago. And right now I'm kind of in that transition between owner to private equity kind of arrangement where I'm working with them, handing over the reins and stuff like that. So been doing that for a couple of years. Sure. And that's kind of how I got here really quick, in a really quick summary.
Okay. No, that's a pretty good summary. So you're to some degree a serial entrepreneur. You started a few businesses, you exited, and you're in the position now of working for a company that's bought, that was yours, that has been purchased by private equity. And so how do you find that transition going from the entrepreneur who's in control to being the person who's running the company and somebody else is in control?
Yeah. So it's really challenging, and it's so diametrically different, because this company's just so much bigger, right? And in a private company, oftentimes you're kind of at the whim of the bank and stuff. They might, you probably have a line of credit. The line of credit's probably tied to your house, those kind of things, unless you get really big, and then of course you can get those things back. But we were at the phase where all that stuff was on the line up until the day I sold, and then I got as I like to say, I got the deed back to my house and a job, right? And but there's the CEO of the company, then there's the board of directors of the company, then there's the private equity that talks to the board, that talks to the CEO, and so if I think, hey, I'd like to change the color on the sign from red to orange, I'm like, okay, I got to talk to the CEO, then I got to the board, then I got to go to the kind of thing. Not I'm exaggerating, but it's a speed thing, right? And I'm kind of like, I kind of just grew up in the world of like 30 years of owning my own company, where I could just change the color of the logo if I wanted to, right? Yeah. And so that's a huge change, right? And also there's kind of ego adjustments that are required, because you're not the last buck. The buck doesn't stop with you anymore. You get a say, you can contribute kind of probably as much or as little as you want, but you're just sort of a contributing element to a much broader, government that makes a decision kind of thing, right? So those are the changes that I find interesting. Of course, you could look at a competitor and as an owner, and now as private equity, we could buy them if we need to, kind of thing. So that's a positive, right? And a much better, aspect of it, that they have capital they can deploy, and you can grow significantly quicker by deploying their capital, right?
Yeah, it's a change in the game. It's a different game effectively when you move to that position, especially from the owner to private equity, which in this case, it sounds like in your situation, it's a relatively large private equity company.
It's about a $10 billion company. So
I'd call that relatively large. Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I've got to ask because I know that
Yeah.
different business owners would answer this in different ways, and I'm curious how you feel. In the
Yeah.
things that you've done, working for the federal government, sales, starting your own business, figuring out an exit plan, and successfully exiting, doing it again, what's been the most enjoyable for you? What is your most happy place in that whole arrangement?
Well, for me, I would say, and although me, and I see a lot of other people that are kind of customer facing or revenue generating, right? Because you own a sales company, kind of everyone's selling. I mean, obviously we have a warehouse and all sorts of admin and finance, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, nobody makes any money unless we buy and sell boxes and things that the best thing is being in front of the customers and actually it's kind of like you're in a Broadway play, right? And you got to go to rehearsals, dress rehearsals, and and blah blah blah. But every night when you get to go out, whatever it is, 4 nights a week, and perform that play, everything else kind of drops away, and it kind of becomes a happy place. Although there are times where my desk and my chair gets very comfortable, and it's like, oh, do I have to go and make the calls, or can someone, and I mean, I'm not on the super front lines because I had sales directors and sales people, but oftentimes I was arm in arm with them. Oh, you got to come, and they want to talk to the president and this and that and whatever, right? And but that's always been my funnest. And then the next down to that is I really kind of like geeky on the technical stuff. So I've been very involved in implementing and adopting new ERP systems. And, although I'm not the programmer, the IT guy, like that guy reports to me. And, a lot of the thought leadership that goes into our automations and our IT deployments, and now inclusion of AI into our business, a lot of that comes from me, right? And so I'm really love, figuring out ways of automating the business and mainly from a systems point of view, right? Like,
Sure.
I see people doing things over and over again. I'm like, wait a minute, we can probably create a routine that can do that for you automatically. And, so I love that kind of geeky part of the business.
And that's becoming especially relevant these days with artificial intelligence, very different from how they have been. And staying on the
Yeah.
cutting edge of that keeps things very
Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah. We're deploying Copilot across it's only with certain people, but I mean, across our enterprise, and we're figuring out how we can use it in marketing and finance, in contract management and sales. And it's such a game changer in terms of productivity. And so, yeah, it feels like a very exciting time to be, to be alive, basically,
Well,
Yeah.
sure. Business is interesting. I'm on board with that. But you're a well-rounded business person with an impressive resume. At the same time, you mentioned that you find sales the most interesting part of things, and I I get that about you. It kind of comes across, and so I want to
Right.
ask you: with sales, there's different ways of looking at sales, and in some ways, sales is a bad word. There's some
Yeah.
negative associations, but I look at it. I call it business development because to me it encompasses all key components of trying to develop revenue for a business. And in your world, if you could speak to what part of sales do you like the most? Is it going out and adventuring so that you can get new revenue? Is it customer service or being able to interact with different people in different spaces with a kind of a mutual goal in mind to make both companies better? Or is it something else? I mean, just tell us a little bit about what you like about sales because it is such a big area, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I can definitely answer that. But before I
Okay.
do, I want to just share one little tidbit.
Sure.
So, the a lot of people get confused about sales and marketing, right?
Right.
And so
Not the same.
I often ask people, like, what's the difference between sales and marketing, right? And a lot of people get close or whatever, but for me, it's like, you know, when you're in front of the customer, demonstrating the product, discussing the contract terms and, things like that, selling, closing the business or presenting the product so then you can close on the business or whatever. That's selling. Everything else is marketing.
Mhm.
Right? Getting in the door, people are like, oh, I love to get on LinkedIn and do the prospect. I go, that's marketing. We can hire people for that. I don't need a sales guy for that. I need a guy who can go or gal, of course, and knock on the door and get in the door and act and stay in front of customers and be a pleasure to do business with always. Like that is what selling is to me, and what I find to be the most fun part. You know, the company that I sold, Gap Wireless, you know, our whole attitude was around being a pleasure to do business with, right? And we had to build it into the DNA of the business from the beginning, versus the company I had built before, where I forgot to build that in. And I tried to add it later, and it was difficult, right? And people are like, you kind of like, you know, they kind of like think I'm talking woo-woo or whatever.
Yeah.
But we have formidable competitors that do as much as us or more than us, and we, you know, respect their domination, you know, either equally or greater than us, but they're not a pleasure to do business with. And it's absolutely irrefutable. Even they themselves probably would admit it, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's a foregone conclusion that if you talk to our customers or our competitors or whatever, you know, so you know, customer service and things like that are important to me. But my participation is really being in front of the clients, kind of like acting that role, and, you know, and showing the product in its best light, and you know, that kind of stuff. You know, you know, handling objections and things like that. That's the part I really like, actually. So
yeah, it's an integral part of the process in business for both companies, right? For the purchasing company and for the selling company, because it's when the salesperson closes the deal, that's exciting and that's fun and that's good for the selling company. But it's also, if it's the right deal, that's good for the purchasing company too. You have to facilitate that big decision for the purchaser, and if you're doing it well, if you're demonstrating a product or a service well, if you're explaining the key components of it properly, if you can relate to the value, then you've done a great service. And it is something that is harder to delegate. Like you can delegate some DMing on LinkedIn, but that's not the same thing as delegating that face-to-face customer relationship at that critical moment between the two companies. I get where you're coming from there, for sure.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, and I don't sell these, but I mean, if you know, people buy $1 million, you know, CAT scans and MRI machines and things like that, and trust me, they don't do it over LinkedIn and they don't do it over Zoom, right? And you know, and you got to be at the customers and on the front lines, right? And one of the rules in my book, right, where, because I'm always talking about being face to face and whatever, right? But one of my rules from the book is, you know, I'd rather be last than second, right? And people are like, well, what does that mean, right? And I'm like, well, number 2 is just the first loser, right? And so I'd rather be last quickly. And so if I'm at a client and I'm demonstrating a product, it doesn't matter whatever phase, at whatever point in the sales cycle, I realize that it's irrefutable that I'm not getting the business because of a multitude of things. Like I know I don't meet the spec and I'm trying to force it. I don't meet the price profile and I'm not going to get there. Whatever it is, I immediately stop all efforts towards that customer. I'm not rude about it. I just stop engaging and I let all the other competitors fight it out. And I immediately run to find a new customer, because, you know, if you think about it geographically, if I'm competing against Bob and Sally and Joe, you know, in Toronto or New York or Boston or whatever, they're all fighting for this deal, you know, trying to sell a CAT scan to, you know, Toronto General or whatever. And I realize I can't get the deal for one reason. I'm not going to interface with their back end or whatever. I'll run off and find the next hospital to sell an MRI to. They're still fighting it out. And there's only can be one winner, right? And so I find it's, you know, I'd rather lose quickly and then redeploy my assets somewhere else. And mistakes I see my guys making is that when they get to that point, they want to fly resources in from, let's fly the guy in from the factory and, you know, we'll take him out for a fancy steak dinner and take him golfing. And I'm like, no, those are all rewards for a relationship that you've already built, you know, rapport on, not as a precursor to trying to get business, right? And
yeah, the key there is that if it's not a great fit, if what you're offering isn't the best solution, then there's no sense in trying to force that. And time is one of the key commodities in the whole equation, right? You've only got so much time. If you're chasing the wrong deals and competing with the wrong people, that's just not a good use of time.
Yeah.
And I think the most successful salespeople out there, they're more aware of that than the bulk of the pack. You know, the average salespeople are missing that point. That's a good point. And for our viewers out there, our listeners out there, It's a really good thing to keep in mind. And this is coming from somebody who's a business owner who understands the value of time as much as the value of closing a deal. But Glenn, I want to circle back to your book a little bit. So you've won an award as an author, and tell us a little bit about that whole part of your business life.
Yeah. So the way the book came about was in the 80s, I started selling and I started learning from some really good salespeople and mentors and the like. And after a while, I realized they were doing things over and over again. So I started writing down the rules and naming them after them, right?
Okay.
And like the Brian factor or something like that, right? And because I would see their behaviors and over time, I developed them into this sort of just like a whole kind of routine or whatever, right? And then I started sort of sharing them and some of the stories, the war stories and the whatever, which often garnered a lot of, laughs and things. And like, and even, it kind of got out, even sharing with competitors and stuff. And I ended up even presenting some of these thoughts and ideas to my competitors' sales meetings, at my sales meetings. And then people are like, well, you should write a book. And of course, I never did. Right. And then when the pandemic came along in 2020, I had this giant notebook filled with 30 years of all these rules, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, what better time now, being locked up for months on end, for me to buckle down and see if I can get it on paper, right? So I Googled, well, how big is a business book, right? And I mean, that day Google told me it was 75,000 words, right? So I came up with the outline. I had more than enough rules, and I started writing. And so at 75,000 words, I sent it to the editor. She told me, you can't say the F word that many times in a book. And so we agreed, okay, fine. Why don't we publish at 71,000 words? And the book was born.
Sorry,
And,
Glenn, the F word wasn't finance, right? It was
not finance. So,
okay.
Yeah.
What is the name of the book?
The book is called Never Sit in the Lobby. And it's 57 tips on how to build a career in business and in sales. And so it's kind of a book you can flip open to any page and start reading one of the rules. You don't have to start at the beginning. You don't have to work through it linearly. You can just flip anywhere you want. And it goes anywhere from, how to get, act, and stay in front of the client, as long as many other things about how to build rapport, especially with the customers, right? And I was at a seminar 2 days ago, and we were talking at the lunch, right? And there were 6 people, and they were arguing about, can we start eating, right? Because the food was coming, right? And the lady across from me who'd read my book, right? But she's like, oh no, Emily Post says, I can't remember what she said, but she was wrong, right? I said, no, you're wrong. I it's in my book, right? And if there's less than 6 people, you have to wait. And she's like that. And so we Googled it, and I was right. Okay. And the guy beside me, said, well, you wrote a book on etiquette? And I'm like, no, I wrote a book on sales, but not screwing up at lunch is a part of it, right? And, where to sit, how to act, what to order, as well as, how to behave in the client's office, not to not to overextend yourself thinking you have built rapport before you have, as well as other basic sales skills, right? So, so that's what the book's all about.
That sounds really good to me. I mean, first of all, you've got the background, you've got the experience.
Yeah.
And some of the examples you're talking about right now, they ring true for me, and I've got a strong business development background. Yeah. But I especially like the idea that you can flip to any page and find something valuable. To me, it tells me that you've mined the diamonds out of the mountains that you've gone through, and they're all in one book. And I think that's potentially very useful for anybody who's running a business, owning a business, in a business, or anything like that.
Yeah. And speaking of diamonds, one of the chapters is called $10 million in diamonds, right?
See?
And it tells the story of the guy, the watchmaker that I met, who owned a jewelry store. And when I went to visit him after knowing him 10 years ago, I came and found him 10 years later, and I asked how he was doing. And he said, oh, I'm so busy. He says, I got to be making a $10 million selling the diamonds, but I am so busy in the back fixing the watches. Right. And I'm like, why don't you hire a watchmaker and go and sell the diamonds, right? And like I learned that lesson even before I went into sales, right? And I mean, and everybody in my company and that knows me knows they just know it. They call it $10 million in diamonds, right? Like focus on where the money is, what's important. And
The
yeah,
comparative
so
advantage. Yeah.
yeah,
There's an opportunity cost if you're not looking
yeah.
at things in the big picture perspective. So, okay, well, that's interesting. And how do people find your book, by the way? Is it on Amazon?
So it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, it's an ebook, audiobook, hardcover, softcover, anything you want. It's there. And you can link to that from my website, Glenn Poulos, and if you want to talk to me, you can talk to me on LinkedIn or, very active on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
yeah.
And let's talk for a moment about the Profit Powerhouse. This is your podcast. You're the host of it.
Yeah.
Tell us
Yeah.
a bit
So
about that.
so that I talk to business people starting, owning, operating, and selling businesses, and sort of focus on how to build value in the business.
Mhm.
Things to do when you're eyeing towards M&A and being bought out, and I learned some interesting things. About sprucing up your company before you sell it.
Mhm.
Things to do, not to do, etc. But also just general things, anything related to sales, marketing, or business is sort of what I focus on with that.
That does sound interesting. It's something we work with for our clients is trying to build the value of the business,
Yeah, exactly.
not necessarily for selling, but just in general, it's a good idea to
Yeah,
do it. And if you want to eventually sell the business, or if you want to bring on investors, or if you even just want to raise funds, it's good to understand
yeah,
what's going on there. It could be
yeah. Like from the CFO perspective, I mean, the quality of information is one of the most important things to me in the business. I mean, I don't want to say like I lucked into it, but I mean, we placed a lot of emphasis on that building my last business, and it made a huge difference when they came along to buy the business, right? They wanted to do quality of earnings and other things, and we had the data snap. We were able to, there were 183 folders in Dropbox for the data room,
yeah,
right? And we were able to get most of it loaded over one weekend, and it was just because there was so many button clicks, right, to get it done. But we had all the data that they needed, right? We had the data cut every way, and we could talk gross margins, we could talk, cost of goods sold, we could talk everything, all the sources of revenue, all the costs that we had, and the
beautiful.
quality of data is so important, and that requires a good finance team, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful, and
Yeah,
it all comes together like that. No
yeah,
question. All right. Last but not least, and maybe not even
yeah,
last, but you are a business coach. Tell us a little
yeah.
bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of times, and I belong to some, the organizations like I belong to PEO Leadership, which is like there's also EO, I think, and then the tech group and things like that, where you get together in a cohort once a month,
Yeah.
and so through that I've met a lot of people, and a lot of the people struggle with things like human resources and how to attract people, when the right time to bring them on, when time to bring them off board them, and also structuring sales teams, compensation, and other executive kind of compensation metrics and things. Spend a lot of time building systems and process. So a lot of people reach out to me, and I talk to them about those kind of things, right? A lot of it around the remuneration of staff and the dashboards that you use to measure people, and that's where I'm mainly helping people in the business.
Okay.
And I mean, most of the people find me just through word of mouth or meeting me at these things and ask me to weigh in on their particular situation.
If you were going to come up with a piece of advice, it doesn't have to be the best piece of advice in the world, but just a piece of advice for any of our listeners or viewers, anybody who would be an entrepreneur looking at growing their business profitably, what advice might you give them? Anything that comes to mind?
So whenever I get asked this question, I
Sure.
always give them the same answer. So it's pretty much like 90% on point with what you just asked, but maybe slightly off because
Okay.
you set the audience, right? But to me, this is a piece of advice for everyone.
Okay. Even
Okay.
better. Even better.
Not just business owner.
Okay.
So, and of course it's in the book, right? But it's you only get forever to make another impression, right? And so people are like, no, that's not the saying. My mother told me it was, you have to make a good first impression. And I'm like, you're right. That's what my mother taught me as well. But, when it comes to impressions, you're always making them. And so you have to behave in a manner when you're in the working world, like you're being watched all the time. And so, especially for people that are not the boss, right? And want to strive to become the boss, right? When that boss is around, you're the best employee that they've ever seen. You're never on Facebook or Instagram. You're never lollygagging. You know what I mean? You're
Texting.
always asking, hey, I got this huge deal. I get your advice?
Yeah.
Even if you don't need it, right? When they take you to the company trade shows, right? And it's slow. A lot of guys are complaining and they're sitting down and they take off from the booth. Don't do that. Hunt down the executives that came to the show and say, what can you train me about the business that I don't already know? And then when you're done with all that, walk into the aisle, pull people into your booth. Whenever you have an opportunity to show yourself in those light, those make lasting impact impressions on people that do make, another impression on them. And so when it comes time for them to make choices, you become obvious and logical, right? And, I always tell people, like, just disregard the advice at your own peril, right? But I can tell you that there's many people, especially because I'm in sales and I go to all these trade shows. That's where I judge most of my people. Do they show up early and help us set up? Do they stay at the end and help us tear down? Are they in the booth, or do they like sneak away and then all of a sudden 3 hours later before they come back, right? And but that occurs in everything. When you're at your desk or whether you're in a meeting, you always want to be putting your best foot forward and making another impression that's a positive one, so that when it comes time to pick the guy to move up, they pick you. And
So that's great advice. You're talking about mindset, you're talking about integrity, you're talking about the secret to success. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so we're at the point in the episode where I give you the opportunity to ask me, as a fractional CFO, any business question, business related question that you might want to pose.
Yeah. So 2-part question, I guess. One would be, like what's the difference between a fractional CRO and a CFO and a full-time one? And are there any risks that you take by not investing in a full-time one, or do you get the same, kind of service, only you don't need it full-time, and so fractional is better and cheaper and, presents a better value? And the second thing is like, let's say at a smaller company where you wouldn't even dream of hiring a CFO, maybe like a $5 million company, with 8 to 10% EBITDA, something like that, and it can't afford the CFO, has a controller or an accounting manager or something. But would it be worth it for a company of even a small size to even buy the smallest piece possible, of a fractional CFO?
Yeah. So to start with the first question, the difference between a full-time CFO and a fractional CFO, and what you might be getting or missing out of a fractional CFO. A full-time CFO is a full-time executive in the organization. They're going to be in all of the meetings. They're going to be in the boardrooms with the key players. They're going to be involved in the water cooler discussions, as well as everything else that a chief financial officer or CFO is supposed to be looking after in a large business. And every large business has a CFO or somebody who's performing that role by another name possibly. But a chief financial officer is providing the executive level leadership and management of the finance and accounting department. They're aligning the department with the other functions of the business, sales and marketing and operations. They are working with the team to turn the vision that the key stakeholders of the business have and the CEO has. They're turning that vision into numbers. So they're providing a budget that's got the guardrails. It helps everybody understand what the impact of different decisions are going to be on the financial statements in the future. And if that's in line with the vision of success, great. Everybody's aware of that. And if it's not, the CFO is going to make sure everybody's aware of that and make course corrections or help the team make course corrections. There's a lot of components that are involved. So it's vision, it's business experience, it's a deep understanding of accounting and other functions of the business and how they all work together and interrelate with one another. The CFO role in different companies can involve more or less of different areas. It can focus more or less in different areas. It depends on the nature of the business. In a heavy manufacturing business, there's going to be all sorts of cost accounting, and it might not be like that in some service businesses. So the full-time CFO is going to be tailored to the kind of business that you're operating, and you're going to want that person to be there on a full-time basis. So what's the difference? A fractional CFO is bringing to the table the experience, the expertise, the knowledge, the understanding, the tools, that I can do these days with a relatively small team and the technology that we've invested in and that we've become very capable with. I can do in a day what used to take weeks and a much larger team to do.
Right.
And so smaller businesses that don't have the time or the proficiency in all sorts of accounting software or financial planning and analysis software can use a fractional CFO and get that on a part-time basis at a fraction of the cost of a full-time CFO. Very similar to a full-time CFO, we are working with the key stakeholders in the business. We are aligning the financial strategy of the business with operations and sales and the overall leadership. And we are making sure that the budget's in place. There's a financial planning and analysis process that we get our clients to follow through with. We're performing components of management accounting. And what that means basically is that in addition to just the financial statements that are being compiled by the bookkeeper, we are also doing accounting that's helping everybody understand the lagging indicators or the financial key performance indicators. What's driving those lagging indicators? What are the costs? How should we be pricing our products and services? Are we profiting more on some products and services than others? Are we making this much money on watches when we should be focusing on diamonds, which is making this much money to cover our overhead, to cover our operating expenses? All of these different things. When we're working with a small business, and I say small, anybody who's like less than $40 or $50 million in annual revenue, anybody who can't afford $250,000 plus full-time chief financial officer, that's where the fractional CFO can work. And at that level, we're performing all of this to the degree that they need it, and they don't need it full-time generally. And even if they need a lot of it, we're making sure they get the most important parts of it. So if the CEO is focused where that person should be focused on the vision and building the business and managing the different functions, we're making sure that when they have questions about finance and accounting, the answers are there for them. And if they're not sure how to interpret them, we can help them interpret them. We can give them an idea of what the baselines are telling us, what the trends are telling us, what we see in terms of insights for the future. And further upon that point, when the CEO or the other stakeholders in the business don't have questions, that doesn't mean we're not talking to them anyway, because in some cases I'm going to the CEO and saying, listen, you need to know this because it's important to your business and there's a potential risk down the road, or there's an opportunity that we're not taking advantage of. Or maybe it's getting more specific once we get to know the business better. You need to work on efficiency in this area of your business so that we can get more profitable on the financial side. And there's ways that we can recommend you do it. You need to develop some metrics for managing your employees better. And when you miss on that, we're going to be able to tell you what the impact is on the financials. And you're going to be able to really understand what is important in your business versus what's a little bit less important. So tying it all together and operationalizing the budget is a good way to put it. We're turning the budget, the plan, the financial component of the plan, which is like the skeleton of the plan, you're turning that into the steps that we need to perform as a business day by day, week by week, month by month. And when we're not doing that, we can see what the financial impact is. So there's a lot there, but even a small business, Glenn, I think your second question was more along these lines. A small business that may not need a whole bunch of that, I still think that they're going to require some understanding that goes beyond what the bookkeeper's doing. The bookkeeper's recording the financial transactions and putting them into financial software like QuickBooks or something. The tax accountant is filing the taxes, and both of those roles are very important. But you see your tax accountant once or twice a year. Your bookkeeper's focused on the past. The chief financial officer, fractional or not, in the case of a small business, a fractional CFO, is going to be able to take that bookkeeping information and turn it into information that helps you make data-driven decisions that are better decisions than you'd make without that insight. Somebody who's helping you recognize what's really important on the financial side of your business, because even if you are good at the finances, you can't really spend your time focused there, but somebody should. You should delegate that to somebody, and that's what the fractional CFO is good at. If you hire a junior accountant to do that for you, even if it's a full-time junior accountant, they're going to be able to help you and they're going to be able to crunch numbers, but they're not going to be able to derive out of the numbers the information that really makes a difference. They're not going to give you the results that a fractional person will. And so that's the best way I can summarize it. But if you have a follow-up question.
And I assume, based on your budget, you can sort of buy as much fraction as you can afford kind of thing, right? It doesn't have to be a day a week kind of thing. It could be, it could be whatever your appetite for CFOing is. That's kind of the way it's a la carte kind of thing, right? In a way, or
Pretty much. Yeah. For our business, we do have a monthly relationship with our clients.
of course,
And
yeah,
that's what we're looking for. We're not looking for one-time project work, but on a
no,
monthly
no,
basis, we're working
yeah,
with our clients. And if
okay,
their needs are relatively small, then we will work with them month in and month out. And as long as we're providing value, they'll want to maintain that relationship. And as
yeah,
long as they're a good client, we'll want to maintain that relationship. And so a lot of our clients we've worked with for years.
yeah,
But as we're working with them, we try to do a lot of what we need to do in the background without, taking up their time. But we do want to have those formal meetings. Usually it's once a month, an hour, where we sit down and we talk about what they need to be aware of. We answer their questions. We put together the budgets. And sometimes we spend more time than that. Sometimes we spend less. But generally, we like to break it down into 3 packages. So in the very beginning, there's like an entry level package, which is the most important tips of the iceberg. We're going to make sure that we're looking after the key components. Are you managing cash flow? Do you have a way of managing cash flow? Because that's often one of the most important things for businesses.
indeed,
We help implement that for them. Do you have a budget? Are you needing to raise funds? Do you understand your trends, what they're telling you? Do you understand where the low hanging fruit is in terms of being more profitable, avoiding risks, increasing your business's value? We are an expense. We don't do this for free, but at the same time, we want to provide a high return on investment. And we're doing that with companies, even if they're relatively small. But as they grow, we can add more to what we're doing. We can get into 3-way budgeting, and we can get into different scenario analysis, looking at if-then scenarios and all kinds of different things. So we can take them to the point where they need a full-time CFO. We don't do it full-time, but we'll transition to somebody who
yeah,
can do that. But we'll provide that need that they've got. We'll fulfill that need, and it's much more with larger companies that are complex. It's a lot less with smaller companies. But if you've outgrown, if your bookkeeper isn't able to answer the questions you've got, or if you're not able to run the business 100% on gut instinct and mental math, then it's time to talk to a fractional CFO and at
yeah,
least get an idea of when it might be a good thing to
yeah.
engage one.
Nice, that's fascinating. Great, that's super helpful. Yeah,
Oh,
thank
good.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks for asking. Yeah, I like talking about this stuff.
yeah, you're passionate about your stuff, and that comes out in your explanation. So so thank you.
Okay, so is there anything else, Glenn? Anything else you'd like to tell our audience or our listeners, viewers?
Nope, nope. They're welcome to buy the book if they want, and there's no pressure there. But and if they want to connect in any way to collaborate or question in any way, LinkedIn's the best way, and I'm pretty accessible there. So
So,
welcome them to reach out, question me on anything that they may have read or heard, and or any questions they might have. I enjoy that, as much as anything. So looking forward to collaborating with any of your listeners that might be interested. So.
excellent. And to our viewers and listeners out there, if you found anything interesting about this podcast, please forward it to somebody else that you think might find it interesting as well. And I think that's it for today, Glenn. So
Yeah,
thank you very much
thank
for
you.
being a guest. Really appreciate
Yeah,
having you on the show.
thanks, Ryan.
And thanks everybody for listening and watching. Bye for now.